There was once a time, long before emperors ruled from marble thrones and legions marched across continents, when Rome was simply a quiet kingdom on the banks of the Tiber River. In those days, the city was not yet the center of the world. There were no grand colosseums, no sprawling forums, no Caesar to be crowned. It was a humble place, surrounded by hills and guarded by its proud people. And it was ruled not by a senate, but by kings. The last of these kings was a man named Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. His name would one day be remembered with a shudder, whispered in the pages of dusty books, and spoken only when telling how a single man's arrogance and a single woman's sorrow brought a kingdom to its knees. Tarquinius, also known as Tarquinius the Proud, was not born to be king. He seized power through ambition, cunning, and, some would say, cruelty. He rose to the throne after the suspicious death of his predecessor, his own father-in-law, and once there, he ruled with an iron fist. His court was rich, his enemies silenced, and his people afraid. He built great temples, yes. He won battles, yes. But the people of Rome did not love him. They feared him. It was during his reign that a woman named Lucretia lived. She was not a queen. She held no political power, no army, no voice in the affairs of state. But her name would echo through time. Lucretia was the wife of Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, a nobleman of good reputation. She was known across the city for her grace, her beauty, and most of all, her virtue. In Rome, virtue was more than just a quality. It was a form of strength. And Lucretia was its quiet symbol. One evening, as the Roman army camped outside the city, fighting a war that few today remember, the noblemen gathered in their tents, speaking not of strategy or battle, but of their wives. Who, they wondered, was the most faithful, the most dutiful, the most honorable? They decided to find out. That very night, they rode on horseback to see with their own eyes. Some wives were found laughing in feasts, others asleep or enjoying music and wine. But Lucretia was found in the quiet of her home, spinning wool by lamplight. She rose, greeted the men with kindness, and offered them comfort without extravagance. She was, as always, dignified, gracious, and without a trace of vanity. All agreed. Lucretia was the finest of Roman women, but one man looked at her differently. Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son, saw not only her virtue, but a possession he wanted, a prize to be taken, a woman not to admit but to conquer. That night, he said nothing. But desire, once awakened, does not sleep easily. And in the days that followed, Sextus allowed that dark seed to grow. He would return to Lucretia not as a friend, but as a predator. But that is a tale for the next night. For now, remember this: before the storm came, before the sword was drawn, before the crown fell to the ground, there was silence, there was dignity, there was Lucretia, spinning wool beneath the flicker of firelight, unaware that the fate of a kingdom would soon rest in her hands. Several days passed. The city of Rome bustled, as it always did. Merchants called from stalls. Children chased each other through dusty courtyards. The Tiber River flowed on, unaware of the secrets carried in its current. But something dark was stirring. Far from the noise of the marketplace, within the mind of Sextus Tarquinius, a thought had taken root. It was not love, nor admiration. It was obsession. He thought of Lucretia often. Not her smile, not her words, but the stillness in her eyes, the dignity in her silence. And like a man possessed, he returned, not with companions, not with laughter, but alone. And at night, he arrived at Collatinus's home under the pretense of friendship. As the king's son, his presence could not be denied. Lucretia welcomed him with the courtesy expected of any Roman noblewoman. She was kind, respectful, but she could not know what lay behind his eyes. Sextus dined with her, spoke of war, praised her home, complimented her grace. And when night came and the household retired, Lucretia withdrew to her chamber. She believed she was safe. But shadows do not sleep. In the still hours, when the wind barely moved, when firelight flickered against stone, Sextus entered her room. He came not with tenderness, but with threat. He spoke quietly, coldly. He told her what he desired, not her love, not her heart, only her body. Lucretia stood firm. She was not afraid to die. She would rather fall by a sword than betray her honor. But Sextus had other weapons. He threatened not only to kill her, but to kill a male servant, place their bodies together, and claim that she had been caught in sin. In ancient Rome, shame could wound more deeply than steel. Lucretia, faced with death or disgrace, chose silence. She endured the assault. But she did not weep, not that night. She waited. She planned. And when morning came, Sextus Tarquinius left, believing himself victorious. But he did not know that Lucretia had already written the end of his story. As the sun rose over Rome, Lucretia called for messengers. Not servants, not soldiers. She summoned her husband, Collatinus, and her father, Spurius Lucretius, and with them, a man who would change the fate of Rome, Lucius Junius Brutus. They came quickly, sensing urgency in her words. When they arrived, they found Lucretia pale, composed, and resolute. She told them all, every word, every threat, every insult. She asked for justice, not by sword, nor by war, but by truth. She begged them to swear, not revenge, but action. That Rome would never again be ruled by a man like Tarquinius, that no king would ever have such power again. And then, she took a dagger. Without hesitation, she drove it into her own heart. Silence. For a moment, there was only the sound of breath, the sound of grief, the sound of something sacred, breaking. Brutus stepped forward. He lifted the blade, slick with blood, and he held it high for all to see. With a voice calm but firm, he made a vow. By this blood, most chaste until it was stained by a tyrant, I swear, no man shall ever again rule as king in Rome. From this day forth, the monarchy ends. It was not only a vow, it was a spark, and that spark would set fire to a kingdom. But that is a tale for another night. For now, let us remember, Lucretia did not march in battle. She held no title. She made no speeches. But in her silence, in her pain, in her death, she built a republic. The morning after Lucretia's death, Rome did not yet know what had happened. The streets bustled as usual. The markets opened. The sun warmed the terracotta rooftops. But in one corner of the city, a quiet revolution was beginning. In the hall where Lucretia's body lay, 4 men stood in grief and in growing rage. Her husband, Collatinus, her father, Spurius Lucretius, and 2 close allies, Publius Valerius and Lucius Junius Brutus. Brutus, the quiet one, the one who had long been underestimated. He had once pretended to be foolish, to survive the tyranny of King Tarquinius, but now he was done pretending. Brutus stood before the others, the blood-stained dagger still in his hand. He did not shout. He did not weep. Instead, he spoke, clearly, calmly. This is no longer the Rome of kings. This is the beginning of liberty. He urged them to carry Lucretia's body into the Forum, the heart of Rome. Let the people see. Let the people hear. No lies, no politics, just the truth. And so they brought her there, not in secret, not in shame, but in full view of the Roman people. Men and women gathered, whispering, then murmuring, then shouting. They listened as Brutus told them everything. He told of the king's son, Sextus, and his crime. He told of the king's silence. He told of the suffering and the death. of a woman who had done no wrong. Then he told them something else. He told them that kings are dangerous. Too much power, too few limits, that no one man should hold so much over so many. And the people listened. That day, Rome changed. No battle had yet been fought, no swords drawn in the streets, but minds had shifted, hearts had hardened, the wind of history had changed direction. Brutus called on the people to rise, not just against Sextus, but against the entire Tarquin family. The time of kings was over. In the days that followed, messengers were sent across the city. Alliances were formed, plans were made, and finally a declaration was written. The monarchy of Rome is abolished. But there was one problem. Tarquinius Superbus was still king. He was not in Rome when all of this happened. He had been away, fighting wars, plotting victories, gathering more for his already growing legacy. When he returned, expecting honor and celebration, he found locked gates. The city had turned against him. The people he once ruled with fear now stood behind Brutus and Collatinus. The crown, no longer his to wear. Tarquinius tried to plead. He tried to intimidate. He even tried to send envoys to negotiate. But Brutus refused to meet. There would be no deals, no compromises. Rome would not forget Lucretia. Rome would not forgive tyranny. Rome would not return to chains. And so, the king fled. He left the city he once ruled. Forever. In his place, something new was born. Not a monarchy, not a new royal bloodline, but a republic. 2 consuls would now lead Rome, elected, not crowned, accountable, not absolute. And the first 2 men chosen to lead? Brutus and Collatinus, the same men who had sworn justice beside the fallen body of Lucretia. But freedom is never given without a fight. And the Tarquins would not forget this insult. Even as they disappeared into exile, they plotted. They whispered. They waited. They would try to return. But Rome had tasted liberty. And once tasted, it cannot be forgotten. Not ever. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, the proud, the powerful, the once mighty king of Rome, now wandered not as a ruler, but as a man without a throne. Exile. A word heavy with silence. No royal court, no marble halls, no subjects bowing as he passed. Only memories, and a burning desire to return. He had ruled for over 2 decades. He had crushed rivals, expanded cities, and watched Rome grow under his iron will. And now, a group of nobles and a grieving woman's death had undone it all. He called it treachery, but Rome called it justice. Tarquinius fled to Etruria, the land of his ancestors. There, among foreign allies and sympathetic lords, he began to rebuild what had been taken from him. He pleaded with Lars Porsena, the powerful king of Clusium. He told him of the betrayal in Rome, of how the rightful king had been cast out, of how chaos would reign without order, without a crown. Porsena listened, not because he loved Tarquinius, but because he loved power. And Rome was too close, too rich, and too proud to ignore. Together, they plotted. A campaign to retake the city, to crush the new republic before it could take root, to silence the voice of the people, with swords. Back in Rome, the air grew tense. The republic was young, still learning how to walk. Its laws were not yet strong. Its leaders were still noblemen, unused to ruling together as equals. The people whispered in the streets. Would the king return? Would the republic survive? Would liberty be nothing more than a passing dream? Brutus knew the danger. He had not fought for power, but for balance. He believed in Rome, not as a kingdom, but as an idea. And that idea was about to be tested. Porsena's army marched, shields glinting beneath the sun. horses kicking up the dirt of ancient roads, banners flying high. It was not just a battle for land, it was a battle for the soul of Rome. As the enemy approached, the Republic rallied. Walls were fortified, spears prepared, prayers whispered. But for many, the fear was deeper than war. They feared the return of silence, of obedience, of kings. And then came the river. The Tiber, Rome's lifeline, now stood between the city and its would-be conquerors. One bridge, one path in, and standing on it were the defenders of the Republic. Among them, a man named Horatius Cocles, a soldier, not a senator, not a nobleman, just a Roman, willing to die for freedom. As the enemy surged, Horatius shouted to his comrades, "Destroy the bridge behind me, I will hold them. Rome must not fall." And with shield raised and sword drawn, he stood alone. Against the tide, against fate, against fear. They say he fought like 10 men. They say he did not yield, even when wounded. And when the bridge finally fell into the river, he jumped in after it. Armor heavy, body bruised, but alive. And behind him, the city still stood. Rome had held. Far from the battlefield, Tarquinius watched. His eyes narrowed, his fists clenched. He had not expected Rome to resist like this. He had expected fear, not fire. But the Republic, it seemed, had found its voice. Not in speeches, not in laws, but in the bravery of its people. And so, for the moment, the king turned away, defeated, but not finished, not yet. Victory brings celebration. But sometimes, it also brings complacency. After the failed attempt by Tarquinius and King Porsena to retake Rome, the city breathed again. The consuls were praised, statues were raised, songs were sung. But beneath the surface, not everyone was content. Not everyone loved the Republic. Some missed the old ways, the order, the silence, the power of kings. And some still dreamed of a return. Among them were the sons of Rome's very own leaders. Even the families of Brutus and of other noble houses were not immune to whispers of treason. Their names were not yet infamous. They were young, ambitious, impatient. They believed the Republic was weak. They believed the people needed a king. They believed Tarquinius should return. And so, in shadows and secrecy, they conspired. Letters were written, seals broken, messengers sent. A plan began to take shape. To open the gates for Tarquinius, to assassinate the consuls, to restore the monarchy from within. But secrets rarely remain buried in Rome. A slave, unknown to history, overheard a conversation. A name, a plan, a promise of gold. He could have kept silent. He could have taken the bribe. He could have walked away. But instead, he went to the Senate. He told them everything. Names were named, including the sons of Brutus. Brutus, who had sworn to defend the Republic. Brutus, who had stood over Lucretia's body and vowed liberty, now faced a truth darker than betrayal. His own children were traitors. He did not wail. He did not rage. He looked upon them with eyes that held centuries of sorrow. And then he gave the order that they be tried, that they be punished, that they be executed. The trial was swift, the evidence undeniable. And so, in the Forum, where the Republic had been born, the sons of Rome were put to death. No special mercy, no whispered pardons. Justice, without favor. And Brutus? He watched. He did not look away. He stood as a father, as a citizen, as a servant of the Republic. Some wept for him. Some called him cruel, but most understood. Rome was not built on blood alone. It was built on principle. And if the Republic was to survive, it had to be more than words. It had to be law. Brutus had set an example. Even the highest would not be spared. That day, the people of Rome learned something new. Liberty is not light. It is heavy. It demands sacrifice. It demands integrity. And sometimes, it demands the most painful choices. But even in grief, Brutus stood tall, and Rome stood with him. Tarquinius, the fallen king, had tried war. He had tried diplomacy. He had even tried subterfuge. All had failed. Now, he wandered from city to city, a monarch without a crown. To some, he was a man to pity. To others, a dangerous relic of a darker time. He was no longer welcomed. Even his former allies grew cold. In Clusium, whispers grew louder. Porsena, the king who had once tried to restore him, now made peace with the Republic. Tarquinius, ever proud, refused to accept it. He traveled to Tusculum, then to Gabii, to Veii, everywhere but home. Rome had shut its gates, and time was shutting its doors. But exile does not kill ambition. Tarquinius wrote letters. He plotted with old loyalists. He whispered of glory days, of golden palaces, of power once held. But no city rose to his call. No army marched in his name. The world had moved on, and Tarquinius was alone. Back in Rome, the Republic stood steady, wounds still fresh, but healing. Consuls were changed each year. New laws written, new traditions born. What once seemed fragile now stood firm. No kings, no crowns, only citizens. But the idea of monarchy did not die so easily. In distant provinces and old temples, some still revered kingship, not out of love for Tarquinius, but fear of disorder. Not everyone trusts the people to rule themselves. And so, even as Rome thrived, the shadow of monarchy lingered. And far away, in a land of fading power, Tarquinius the Proud grew old. Not in battle, not on a throne, but in memory. The young Republic, barely a decade old, began to find its voice. It no longer trembled in the shadow of kings. The people of Rome walked taller. They voted, they argued, they built. Stone by stone, law by law. A new Rome emerged. No palaces for monarchs, no titles passed by blood. Only res publica, the public thing. Each year, 2 consuls were elected. Checks and balances. One to temper the other. Power, shared, not seized. Senators debated late into the night. Praetors judged. Tribunes defended the voice of the common man. This was not perfection, but it was promise. Temples rose again. Trade returned. Families once divided by loyalty now reunited. And at every street corner, in every square, one name was whispered with reverence. Lucretia, the woman who said no. The woman who stood alone. The woman whose silence ended a dynasty. She had become a symbol of virtue, of sacrifice, of Rome's beginning. Her story was told to children, etched in stone, preserved in memory. But the Republic was still young, and youth is often tested. Whispers of war stirred again. Old enemies watched, and new rivals waited. The question was no longer, could Rome survive? Now, could it lead? The Etruscans, once allies, now uncertain neighbors, saw opportunity. Rome was rising, and in rising, it threatened those who once ruled unchecked. One Etruscan city, Veii, grew restless. Tensions turned to raids. Raids turned to skirmishes. Skirmishes to war. Rome answered with steel. Consuls donned armor. Farmers became soldiers. The Republic marched. This was not conquest. This was survival. For the first time since the monarchy fell, Rome fought not for a king, but for itself. Battles raged across hills and rivers. The Battle of the Cremera became legend. A noble Roman family, the Fabii, offered to lead the charge. 300 brothers, sons, fathers, fought under a single banner. For months they held the line, until one day, an ambush and silence. Almost all were lost. The blood of the Fabii soaked the soil. Rome mourned, but in that mourning was resolve. The Republic did not retreat. It learned. It adapted. It returned. Years passed. Forts built. Alliances made. And at last, victory. Veii was humbled. Rome stood tall once more, not as a kingdom, but as a republic. That would not break. Amid war and loss, Rome did not forget. Not its heroes, not its beginnings. New festivals emerged, to honor liberty, to honor sacrifice. At the heart of it was Lucretia. Temples were dedicated to Libertas, the goddess of freedom. Every spring, citizens walked the streets, candles in hand, recalling the day Rome chose itself. Her image appeared in mosaics, in whispered prayers, in the dreams of daughters. And Brutus, though long gone, was never far from thought. The father who chose justice over blood. Statues of him stood not on thrones, but beside the people. His dagger, the one that had struck tyranny, was displayed in the Senate, not as a weapon, but a reminder. Children recited the names: Lucretia, Brutus, Horatius, Valerius, the founders of freedom. They had not built palaces. They had built a promise that Rome would never kneel again. Lucretia never saw the Rome she created. She never walked its free streets, never heard her name cheered. She died in silence, but from that silence came a voice that never faded. Her story spread far beyond the walls of the city. Poets sang of her. Historians debated her. Women wept for her. She became more than memory. She became meaning. In distant provinces, her tale inspired revolt. In quiet homes, her name was whispered in prayers. She was not a queen, not a warrior, but she had done what no army could. She had ended a line of kings, with dignity, with pain, with truth. And as centuries passed, as empires rose and fell, one thing remained, that in the very heart of Rome, a woman once stood alone, and by standing, she changed the world. With the monarchy long gone, and the name of Tarquinius fading like a bad dream, Rome settled into the rhythms of a republic. But peace is never permanent. Beyond the city walls, new enemies watched. Jealous city-states, ambitious warlords, restless tribes. Each year brought a new skirmish, a border dispute, a threatened alliance, a call to arms. The Republic held, not perfectly, not without fear, but with determination. Consuls came and went, some wise, some corrupt, but none were kings. Laws evolved. The 12 tables were written, Rome's first attempt at codified law, posted in the forum, read aloud to children, argued in court. Justice for all, or at least the beginning of it. Rome had become more than a city. It had become a system, a belief. That power should be shared, that people mattered, but not all shared that belief. Old families still whispered, and some longed for the crown. The battle between monarchy and republic was not over. Not in swords, but in ideas. Though Tarquinius had died in exile, his legacy was not entirely buried. He had grandchildren, great-nephews, distant loyalists, men who bore his name and his pride. One such man, Titus Tarquinius, returned to Rome in secret. He did not come with armies. He came with arguments. Rome, he claimed, was weaker now, divided, corrupted by too many voices. He promised order, stability, a return to strength. Some listened, some remembered the glories of the early kings, but most remembered Lucretia and Brutus and the blood that had been spilled. Titus was arrested, tried, exiled, not because he fought, but because he tried to undo what the people had chosen. This was the final whisper, the last echo of kings. From that day forth, the idea of monarchy was not feared, it was forgotten. Years became decades, decades became centuries. Rome grew in might, but Lucretia's name never faded. Her story became more than myth, more than history. It became a lesson in strength, in silence, in standing firm. Mothers told their daughters, "Be like her." Not in tragedy, but in truth. Lucretia became a symbol of dignity, of resistance, of courage without cruelty. Temples bore her likeness, not as a goddess, but as a Roman. Simple robes, downcast eyes, but unshaken. Artists carved her name beside those of generals and kings. She, who held no title, but changed everything. And every year, in the Festival of Freedom, a single candle was lit for her. One flame, to remember the moment Rome chose to rise. The centuries rolled on. Wars were fought, conquerors came, and still, the Republic endured. It was not perfect. It had its tyrants, its mistakes, its civil strife. But the idea remained. Rome belonged to its people, and at the center of that idea was Lucretia. Her name stood for the moment power changed hands, from one to many, from crown to citizen, from silence to voice. The Republic built roads that crossed continents, laws that inspired civilizations, languages that reached beyond borders. But none of it, none of the greatness, could have existed without that first moment, that first no, that final breath, that silent courage. Lucretia was not the first to suffer, but she was the first to be heard. And from her came a world reborn. And so we return to where we began, a quiet home, a woman at her loom, a visitor at the door, a story of pride, of pain, of power undone. Lucretia did not seek greatness. She did not seek revenge. She simply stood. And when she could stand no longer, she gave her truth. And that truth moved mountains. Rome today is stone and ruin. But beneath the arches, in the cracks of the old roads, her story still lingers. In the whisper of the wind through the forum, in the hush of twilight on the Palatine Hill, in every place where someone says, enough. This was her legacy, not in gold, not in empire, but in courage. Courage to face what is wrong and to light with trembling hands the first spark of something new. To this day, Lucretia lives in every woman who stands, in every voice that speaks, in every nation that chooses freedom. And that is the true beginning of Rome.